Hi everyone, welcome to my Smart Learning YouTube channel. I hope you can make good use of my Smart Learning YouTube channel to learn more new knowledge and become a smarter and happier person. Since I have been spending lots of time and effort in making this kind of YouTube video, I welcome you to make donation for me, and I accept your donation. You can donate some money for me through PayPal or Venmo. My PayPal account is paypal.me/gracef327, or you can Venmo me. My Venmo account is at grace_Rainier. Thank you very much for your support. In this video, we will mainly focus on examining the advantages and disadvantages of economic globalization. First, we will talk about the benefit of economic globalization. The benefits of economic globalization: division of labor, efficiency, growth, and poverty alleviation. The case of Nike fully demonstrates the importance of the development of the international division of labor. For multinational companies such as Nike, the international division of labor and outsourcing processes have greatly improved their operational flexibility and reduced production costs. For enterprises in developing countries, joining this kind of international division of labor system can integrate with the international market and help local industrial development. The Hong Kong-listed Yuan Industries is a successful example. This company started in Taiwan and is now the world's largest manufacturer of sports shoes, with customers including Nike, Adidas, Timberland, and more. In the international division of labor system, countries in the world can develop their own advantageous industries and through exchange in the world market, obtain economic benefits, drive national development, and ultimately benefit the whole country. Not only the development of enterprises in developed countries has accelerated, but also enterprises in developing countries have more opportunities to join global production, accelerate the development of local industries, and bring the country out of poverty. Now let's examine the theory of comparative advantage. Theory of comparative advantage. The basis of free trade. The foundation of the free trade system is the theory of comparative advantages. It is believed that improving efficiency through international division of labor will benefit the world as a whole. The purpose of the World Trade Organization is to create a peaceful and stable market environment, allowing countries to develop their own industries with comparative advantages and obtain economic benefits through exchanges in the world market, so that enterprises in all countries can engage in efficient activities and stimulate investment. It aims to promote employment, drive national development, and ultimately benefit all people, thereby reducing poverty in the world. The World Trade Organization has proposed 10 benefits of free trade. So here is the box 2, talking about the 10 benefits of multilateral free trade system proposed by the World Trade Organization. By enabling the smooth operation of international trade activities, it provides countries with a fair arbitration mechanism for trade disputes, which contributes to international cooperation and contributes to world peace. Second, through the mediation and arbitration mechanism, the WTO can provide constructive solutions to international trade disputes. Third, the WTO operates in accordance with the rules and regulations agreed upon by all countries, so that poor and rich countries have an equal right to speak. Smaller countries can also increase their influence by forming alliances. Fourth, free trade can help reduce production costs by using cheaper import raw materials, so that the price of finished goods will drop and the cost of living will drop. Fifth, free trade provides consumers with more choices, whether it is goods or services, more choices in variety and quality, in addition to finished products. The free import of raw materials, components, and various equipment will help improve the quality of local production. Sixth, lowering trade barriers can increase national income, while trade has exposed local producers to greater competition. The increased total revenue means more resources are available to help different businesses and workers adapt to the transition. Seventh, free trade stimulates economic growth and also helps employment. Protectionism may help jobs in the short term, but in the long run, it will make the company less competitive, which will lead to long-term difficulties. Conversely, companies engaged in international trade generally offer better employment prospects. Eighth, free trade allows countries to divide labor and cooperate to engage in more efficient economic activities, reduce government intervention, make business activities smoother, and reduce costs. Ninth, the regulation of free trade helps governments in various countries to isolate themselves from West interest groups, so that minority interest groups can no longer lobby the government and maintain the best interest of the minority through protectionist means, so that different economic sectors in the country can compete fairly. 10th, the WTO system encourages clean government. The WTO operates in accordance with the rules and regulations of the Common Agreement, and the arbitration of the government is greatly reduced, which enables enterprises to have a predictable and stable operating environment and reduce the possibility of corruption and fraud in government departments. The comparative advantage, the comparative advantages. The comparative advantage theory of classical economics is the foundation of free trade. It states that it is more beneficial for countries to specialize in production products that have a comparative advantage and then to trade than for each country to produce all the products it needs. Economists claim that global trade benefits both industrial and poor countries, largely based on the above theory. Through the international division of labor, it can focus on the expertise of each country, thereby improving economic efficiency. Not only the development of enterprise in developed countries has accelerated, but also developing countries have more opportunities to join the global division of labor, accelerate the development of local industry, and reduce poverty. In fact, those who support globalization often use the theory of comparative advantage to refute anti-globalization voices, referring to anti-globalizers as protectionists. For the past 50 years, since the establishment of the post-war GATT, the average annual growth rate of world merchandise trade has reached 6%. At the same time, global FDI growth has been impressive. Free trade terms negotiated since the Uruguay round have boosted total world income by between 109 billion and $510 billion, according to the WTO's 10 benefits of the WTO trading system. Investment, growth, and employment. World Bank economist David Poller and Art Craig published an article, Spreading the Wealth, in the journal Foreign Affairs, which is a good example of the positive attitude that international trade can promote economic growth. They point to three major trends in globalization since the 1980s. First, during the 200 years from the end of the 18th century to the 1970s, the worldwide inequality between the rich and the poor continued to rise, reached a peak in 1975, and stabilized after that, and even had a downward trend. Second, after the 1980s, there was a clear positive relationship between active investment in international trade and investment and faster local economic growth. If the developing countries in the world are divided into two categories, globalizing and non-globalizing countries, according to the degree of globalization, it will be found that the economic growth rate of the former is much higher than that of the latter, even higher than that of the developed countries. Third, globalization has not worsened domestic inequality everywhere. After the 1980s, inequality worsened in some countries, for example China, but improved in others, for example the Philippines. Therefore, domestic inequality is not necessarily related to open trade and investment. On the contrary, domestic institutional influences such as education, taxation, and social policy are more significant. In general, the two scholars believe that economic globalization can become an important force for poverty alleviation. By participating in international trade, developing countries can speed up the development of their local economics. By reforming local policies, they can also benefit different sectors of the country. The number of poor people in the world has been greatly reduced. Most economists agreed on the importance of free trade and investment. In the international division of labor system, countries in the world can develop their own advantageous industry and through exchange in the world market, obtain economic benefits, drive national development, and ultimately benefit the whole country. Not only the development of enterprises in developed countries has accelerated, but also enterprises in developing countries have more opportunities to join global production, accelerate the development of local industries, and bring the country out of poverty. Trade allows developing countries to concentrate resources on industry that are more beneficial to them and profit from global export markets. David Poller and Art Gray point out in the article, Trade, Growth, and Poverty, that after the 1980s, there is a clear positive relationship between active participation in international trade and investment and local economic growth. If developing countries are divided into two categories, globalizing and non-globalizing countries, according to the degree of globalization, it will be found that economic growth rate of the former is much higher than that of the latter, even higher than that of developed countries. According to Oxfam's book, Unfair Rules, Trade, Globalization, and Poverty, the per capita income of developing countries from export is higher than that from relief, $10, 30 times more, and low-income countries also earn 20 times more from export, $113 than aim, $9. The comparative advantage of developing countries is mostly labor-intensive production, which brings a lot of employment opportunities. In the 1980s, an estimated 1.7 million people in Bangladesh were drawn into EPCs to produce ready-to-wear clothing, and although their wages were low by international standards, their daily wages were still twice that of agricultural workers. Martin Rama points out in the article, Globalization and Workers in Developing Countries, that if the world countries are divided into three country categories, namely non-globalized countries, rich countries, these countries have already fully participated in the international market, and globalized countries as new entrants to the international markets. The wage growth rate of workers in globalized countries was 10% higher than those in rich countries. East Asia's rapid economic growth over the past few decades can also be partly attributed to the benefits of globalized production. In East Asia, exports have grown much faster than GDP since the 1970s. In South Korea, Taiwan, and China, export grew twice as fast as GDP. In China, exports account for a quarter of GDP, while South Korea, Malaysia, and Thailand account for more than half. For the region as a whole, the export or GDP ratio increased from about 25% to 39%, faster than in other developing regions. With economic development, East Asia has made great achievements in poverty eradication. Although it is impossible to attribute all the economic achievement of East Asia to open trade policies. In fact, most countries take protective measures when their economies begin to develop. The investment in the International Division of Labor has brought great impetus to economic development. Market opening and economic benefits. James Gardner and Robert Lawson in the Economic Freedom of the World 2003 annual report on the relationship between the free market and economic growth points out that out of 123 countries that can maintain a free market system for a long time can achieve better results in economic growth, resulting in a higher level of people's income. From 1980s to the year 2000, the 20% of countries with the highest market freedom, EFW, Economic Freedom of the World Index, and the 20% of countries with the lowest market freedom has significant gaps in terms of investment, growth, and income levels. More importantly, countries with a higher degree of free market investment are also more productive. Therefore, the two economists stress that all countries in the world should establish a free market system in order to attract investors and entrepreneurs to invest in high-efficiency projects, thereby promoting economic growth. Countries with higher scores in the index have significantly higher growth rates of GDP per capita between 1992 and the year 2001. The countries with the highest free market degree index have per capita income of $22,922, and the countries with the lowest quintile have per capita income of less than $4,000. Comparing the bottom 10% of these countries, it is also found that countries with a higher degree of free market also generally have higher income level of low-income people. Next, we want to examine the disadvantage of economic globalization, the reality of international trade, criticism of the free trade system. The increase in international trade has indeed enabled many countries to successfully develop their local economies. However, in practice, free trade is not only as open and equal as advertised. The two major problems that frustrate the free trade system are the uneven distribution of results and the fact that not all countries can equally participate in international trade. There are issues of international inequality of wealth and distribution of benefits. In the article, The Unremarkable Record of Liberalized Trade by Christian F. Weller points out that the effect of free trade is not very satisfactory, and the economic growth brought by international trade cannot actually solve the problems of income inequality. First, From the perspective of the wealth income distribution, the wealth inequality has not actually decreased. In 1980, the median incomes of the richest 10% of the world were 77 times that of the poorest 10%. By 1999, the ratio has risen to 122%, 122 times. In terms of population, the average income of the richest 10% of the world in 1980 was 70 times that of the poorest 10%, and by 1999, it was 112 times. Second, if we look at the distribution of the world's poor population, the world's poverty situation has not necessarily improved significantly. Looking at the major regions of the world, it is basically East Asia that has been able to significantly improve poverty. In Eastern Europe and Central Asia, plus Latin America and the Caribbean, the proportion of the poor has even risen. Improvements in South Asia and Africa are also less dramatic. One of the obvious reasons for the gap between rich and poor is the level of participation in global trade. Although in terms of numbers, developing countries have shown remarkable achievements in export growth in recent years. Most of the growth has come from East Asia, but sub-Saharan Africa lost a quarter of the world market in the 1990s. Current world trade share is only 1.3%. Even if developing countries can benefit from globalized trade, many of the benefits do not necessarily fall into the pockets of the lower classes. In Latin America, in the 1990s, for example, exports were growing at 5% per year, while in countries such as Brazil and Peru, real wages fell and the unemployment rate for the urban population more than doubled to 10 million. In Bangladesh, where the garment export industry is growing rapidly, the daily salary of women garment workers is only US $1.5, which is only slightly above the poverty line. According to the theory of comparative advantage in economics, trade liberalization can promote the transfer of domestic resources from lower productivity uses to higher productivity. But in fact, it is often due to the immediate impact of trade liberalization that domestic inefficient manufacturers have collapsed under international competition. Many people's livelihoods have been hit hard by the decline of old sectors, and new industrial and agricultural sectors have not developed enough to provide new jobs, exacerbating unemployment. To make matters worse, the IMF will insist that these countries adopt a tightening monetary policy, thus keeping interest rates high and making job creation more difficult. At the same time, because the local social safety net is not perfect, the unemployed, due to trade liberalization, are even more helpless. For detail, please refer to Joseph E. Stiglitz, Globalization and its Discontents. In 1999, the United Nations Development Programme put forward a series of criticism of the issues of globalization in its Human Development Report. When the market is overexerted and dominates social and political outcomes, the opportunities for globalization and the remuneration spreads unfairly and unequally, concentrating power and wealth in the hands of a few people, countries, and corporations, and marginalizing others. Lack and separation of peripheral countries. The issues of international inequality between rich and poor countries, in fact, involves unequal participation in international trade. In international trade, political relations and geographical location are two very important factors. According to the report FDI in Least Developed Countries at a Glance, in the year 2002, by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, 49 least developed countries in the world have long accounted for the world's total foreign direct investment. The portion is less than 1%, which is basically a group that cannot benefit from world economic growth. Among the 49 countries, 15 have experienced a decline in attracting foreign investment in recent years. World trade and investment are actually inseparable from international politics. According to the UNCTAD's World Investment Report 2003, since 1990, there has been a marked increase in bilateral investment treaties, BIT, bilateral investment treaties, and bilateral taxation arrangements, DTT, double taxation treaty, that encourage international investment and trade. But these treaties are concentrated among advanced countries, or countries that are adjacent to and have strong political ties with these advanced countries. In fact, international politics and international trade have always influenced each other. Powerful countries can create favorable conditions in international trade through their own political and economic strengths, and force weaker countries to sign trade clauses that are more favorable to industrialized countries. For developing countries, they can only passively accept the rules of the game set by developed countries, and thus become losers in global trade. Developing countries with less political influence or geographically distant from powerful countries are excluded from the map of international trade and investment. As a result, globalization has only exacerbated inequalities between countries. Inequality of power in the trade negotiation process. The power of different countries in the trade negotiation process varies greatly. The greater the political power of a country, the more favorable conditions it can obtain from it. Countries with backward economic development get the most unfavorable terms of trade, while makes people doubt the fairness of free trade. Many industrialized countries implement free trade policies on the surface, but the degree of trade openness varies with different countries. In most cases, industrialized countries set up the biggest trade barriers to the major export industry of developing countries. Textiles and garments, as shown in box 3, and agriculture, as shown in box 4, two of the most important export industries for developing countries, clearly demonstrate the inequality in international trade. So here is box 3 about the textile and garment industry, which has heavy trade barriers. The textile and garment industry is an important source of export earnings for developing countries. Yet industrialized countries impose discriminatory trade barriers on garment and textile exports from developing countries. In the Uruguay round of trade negotiations, industrial countries agreed to abolish the multi-fiber agreement in stages. The multi-fiber agreement is mainly a quota system that restricts the export of textile and garment to Canada, the United States, NAFTA, and the European Union. According to the WTO Agreement on Textile and Apparel, during the 5-year period from 1995 to the year 2005, the multi-fiber agreement was withdrawn in 4 stages. However, the industrialized countries took advantage of the loopholes in the agreement to delay liberalization. For example, according to the agreement, industrialized countries should cancel at least 51% of import tariffs on textile and clothing products before January 2001. Although the EU technically meets the target, in fact, industrialized countries use categories that make it difficult for developing countries to export, such as parishes. Prioritizing liberalization and removing quotas from unexhausted products categories in developing countries, leaving only 12% of the original import quotas removed. Box 4 show agricultural internal subsidies and external dumping. While manufacturing exports from developing countries are growing, agricultural production still accounts for more than a third of export in about half of developing countries. Since farmers account for a considerable portion of the world's poor population, agricultural exports have a great impact on poverty eradication in these developing countries. However, due to the trade policies of industrial countries, the growth of agricultural export in developing countries was extremely slow. From 1980 to 1997, the share of developing countries in agricultural exports increased by only 1%. Industrial countries' policy to hinder agricultural export from developing countries mainly include subsidies and dumping. According to the OECD's producer funding indicators. The EU and the US spent more than $9 billion to $10 billion on agricultural subsidies in the 1990s, compared with a decade ago, with subsidies accounting for 40% and 40% of the two countries' gross agricultural production, respectively. As a result, smallholder farmers in developing countries earning less than $365 a year must compete with farmers in the United States who receive an average of $21,000 a year in subsidies, and EU farmers who earn $16,000 a year. In order to protect their own agricultural industry, developed countries often sell their surplus agricultural products at lower than cost price in countries around the world. According to the Oxfam Export Dumping Estimates survey, the US and EU account for half of the world's wheat exports. Yet export prices are 46% and 34% below production costs, respectively. The US accounts for half of global corn exports, but they are sold for less than 20% of the export price. Industrial countries often use food aid to destroy agriculture in developing countries. When world food is overproduced, food prices fall, and low-income countries can afford to buy enough food. Industrial countries use excess agricultural products as aid, and when world food prices rise, industrial countries reduce the amount of aid instead. As a result, aid for trade has often become a form of dumping in disguise, as US aid said in 1996 report. Out of 10 countries importing US agricultural products, 9 were recipients of food aid. Cancun World Trade Conference. The negotiation breakdown at the September 2003 meeting of WTO ministers in Cancun, Mexico, clearly illustrates the serious power struggles of the trade negotiating system. This meeting can be regarded as the transition of the WTO Doha round of negotiations. The original deadline of the Doha round is December 31st, 2004. The original goals of the round include: first, improve the openness, fairness, and freedom of agricultural trade by coordinating lower subsidies and lower tariffs, especially lower tariffs on products that help developing countries, such as textiles. Second, discuss to speed up the liberalization of trade in services. Third, discuss the 4 so-called Singapore issues of global economic rules: competition, investment, trade facilitation, transparency of government procurement. So here is a table about the Group 22 members. Countries belong to the Group 22 members are Argentina, China, Uganda, Indonesia, Paraguay, Thailand, Bolivia, Cambodia, Egypt, Mexico, Peru, Venezuela, Brazil, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Nigeria, the Philippines, Chile, Cuba, India, Pakistan, South Africa. In the end, the Cancun meeting did not reach any agreement or even end in failure. The developed countries, led by Europe and the United States, and the developing countries of the G22 alliance, led by Brazil, China, and India, have clear disagreement among themselves. Most developing countries hope that European and American countries will cancel or reduce subsidies for agricultural exports. However, due to political pressure from local agricultural sectors and farmers, Europe and the United States have little interest in reducing subsidies to increase international agricultural trade. On the other hand, after Europe and the United States raised the Singapore issues that would benefit their own interests, more than 90 developing countries united together to declare that they would not discuss these issues. The talks ended without any agreement. From this, we can once again see the importance of international political power struggles in international trade.